A press conference isn't going to determine whether Ben Johnson is a great head coach for the Chicago Bears. But the new leader of the franchise nailed his first impression with some really strong answers about leadership, developing an offense, and developing Caleb Williams.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. I'm a writer for Sports Illustrated. I've been covering the Chicago Bears here on the Locked On Podcast Network for over 7 years. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. And you can follow the podcast at Locked On Bears on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and the Locked On Bears YouTube channel, where you can keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Right now, new customers can get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. On the show today, we're going to go through some of the most notable moments from Ben Johnson's introductory press conference as Chicago Bears head coach. You'll see how he's able to lead the room and really command everyone's attention, have a lot of confidence at the podium, and demonstrate a lot of the clear communication skills that he ended up talking about, that Ryan Poles highlighted, that they all see as strong features of Ben Johnson as a head coaching candidate. We'll dive into what he's learned and what he's foreseeing about transitioning from being a coordinator to being a head coach, and how he's going to stay on top of all of the responsibilities that come with leading a team instead of just leading an offense. But we will dive into what we should expect from Ben Johnson's offense. And he shares some of his general offensive philosophies in a way that should get you pretty excited about what the Bears are going to be able to do this season. And then we'll go more narrowly on Caleb Williams and his plan for making the play caller and the quarterback function as one, and really being on the same page from the very start and checking in heavily throughout the process here. But I think we all wanted to see how Ben Johnson would handle getting to run the show himself, right? That's kind of the biggest question mark. We've seen he's been a great offensive coordinator, a great play caller before, but the duties of a head coach, a little different. A little more responsibility on his shoulders, and just because you can call some plays really well when Dan Campbell is leading the room doesn't necessarily mean that you can lead the room in the same way. And so the press conference is kind of his first opportunity to not only, answer for himself and try and convince you with his words, but also in his demeanor and in his energy and just the way he carries himself. And I think already we've seen Ben Johnson show you a lot of green flags, a lot of really strong first impressions here that, again, don't guarantee anything, but he keeps passing every test. And so I liked the way that Johnson in particular addressed this idea of like, okay, you've been a good coordinator. How do we know you're going to be a good head coach? And he has some very specific things that he's paying attention to and that he's trying to establish now that he's taking over the Bears' job.
There have been many great coordinators that haven't turned into great head coaches. What did you learn about what it takes to make that transition and what it takes to be a good head coach?
Yeah, the role and responsibilities are completely different, and I'm well aware of that, and I know that a lot of coordinators have failed in this role. Here's what I'd tell you is every step of my journey, whether it's quality control, whether it was position coach, whether it was coordinator, I have found a way to change myself to be the best in that particular job. And so now that the job requirements are changing and I'm no longer just coaching an offensive player or an offensive unit, this is the entire team. And the good news is this, I am a football coach, so I will be able to change and adjust accordingly. The most important thing that we do here is we establish the culture that we want in this building in the springtime. Accountability and integrity, they're going to be cornerstones of this. Team first mentality is going to be critical for us. I already talked about the communication, the structure, the consistency. That's going to be felt by our players from day one all the way through the end of the season, okay? And at the end of the day, we are going to lean on a professional work ethic. We're going to learn how to be pros here in this building. We'll be deliberate and intentional with what we do, and then we'll get out of the building and off our feet.
Right away, you can tell Ben Johnson clearly did his homework, right? He looked into and paid attention to the things that Matt Eberflus did wrong and the things that led to Matt Eberflus's firing so that he could address those right away on the front end as big positives for himself here, right? When you talk about not just culture in the more general term, but accountability and integrity, communication, structure, consistency. Like these were things that were lacking under the previous regime that led to their downfall. And Ben Johnson talked a lot about being able to set a high standard and challenge players. I think one of the things he said in his opening speech before he was asked questions, but he told players, get ready, or you're going to need to get comfortable being uncomfortable. He said, I'm going to set the bar higher than it's ever been before, and I'm going to push you, and I'm going to challenge you, and we're going to have a high set of standards and also a high level of support, with everything being about helping you become the best version of yourself. He talked about crystal clear communication, structure, and consistency, so that every day, everyone will know what their job is, what their responsibility is, what the expectations are from them. And he said, we'll show you what it looks like, what it's supposed to look like, and then also what it's not supposed to look like, so that everyone is clearly aware of what their job is, what their responsibilities are, and everyone's on the same page about what everyone else's responsibilities are. It's this kind of structure and communication and consistency and accountability there that was so much lacking in the Eberflus era. And it's the kind of things that, a first-time head coach might not always know how to properly prepare for, set up, structure, and identify. Clearly, Matt Eberflus, as a first-time head coach, wasn't able to do those things. And Ben Johnson comes in right away and goes, no, these things are going to be integral to what the Bears are going to be and how they're going to be successful with him as the leader. I mean, then he talked about, and we heard him talk about work ethic and learning to be pros and stuff. You got all the basic stuff there too, but that's all on a foundation of communication, structure. And I think that's really how you have that. That's what the culture is all about, right? Accountability and integrity. Guys knowing and being there for their teammates and therefore doing their job. It's not just platitudes. It's not just saying, yeah, I'll be there for you, buddy, but having real accountability. Ben talked about, if as far as enforcing discipline, right? Clearly communicating and the expectations. And then also when there are repeat offenders, he used the phrase, we're going to make an example of them. If someone continues to be a repeat offender, then we'll make sure that everyone sees what happens when you don't meet expectations and you're not keeping yourself accountable. And he talked about how initially this is something that the coaches need to do, but he hopes that after a couple seasons when they're winning games consistently, that veterans in the locker room will be able to maintain a lot of that accountability. But until then, it's the coaches that are going to do it. And man, it just sounds like the exact kind of structure and foundation and setup that the Bears desperately needed, the Bears desperately missed under Matt Eberflus, and can give you a little bit more confidence in, okay, maybe this Ben Johnson guy knows what he's doing as a potential head coach, in addition to being a good offensive coordinator. And we're excited to see what his offense is going to look like with the Chicago Bears, because Johnson himself says, and we'll hear it from him here, this is not going to look like the offense it was in Detroit. Don't expect this to be the Detroit Lions offense in Chicago. So what is it going to look like then? We'll hear from Ben Johnson himself and apply this to what the Bears have on their team right now. Next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by Talkspace. Therapy is a game changer. It can help manage stress, improve sleep, and communicate more effectively. But finding the right therapist and fitting sessions into a busy schedule can be a challenge, and that's where Talkspace comes in. Talkspace is the leading virtual therapy provider that makes getting the help you need easy, accessible, and affordable. Talkspace is covered by many insurance plans, and for most insured members, there's a $0 copay, so it's never been easier to prioritize your mental health. I do talk therapy, and it's a really important part of my own personal mental health regimen, and I can't recommend enough getting yourself the kind of help you need with Talkspace. Even if it's just simple stuff, it doesn't have to be a life in crisis by any means. Talkspace can just help you be the best version of yourself. As a listener of this podcast, you'll get $80 off your first month with Talkspace when you go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL and enter in our promo code SPACE80 To match with a licensed therapist today, go to Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL, promo code SPACE80 to get $80 off your first month and show your support for the show. That's Talkspace.com/LockedOnNFL, promo code SPACE80. Ben Johnson had a great offense in Detroit, but we can all acknowledge that that doesn't guarantee that the offense is going to just translate to Chicago and be everything the Bears want it to be and everything he thought it would be in Detroit. And certainly it would be foolish to think you could just pick up the Lions offense, take it across Lake Michigan, drop it on Soldier Field in Hallis Hall and say, here you go, Caleb Williams, you be Jared Goff, and DJ Moore, you be Amon-Ra St. Brown, and DeAndre Swift, you be Jahmyr Gibbs, and Cole Kmet, you be Sam Laporta, and let's all role play Detroit Lions offense. I think that's not how that works. Certainly, offensive line play is going to be a part of that conversation that Ben Johnson definitely did address in his press conference and said, hey, like, offensive line play needs to be better. I think he implied loosely that offensive line coaching needs to be better as well. He didn't use those exact words, but I read between the lines, and I think I got the impression he felt like, yeah, that group maybe wasn't being coached well enough either. So I think that's going to change and be a step towards improvement. But more broadly though, just the general structure of the offense is going to be different. Like, there are some key offensive philosophies that Ben Johnson carries, right? He's not coming here and going to switch to an under center wishbone triple option offense, right? There's certain things that he's going to want to have as foundational identity type pieces of the offense. But from there, he knows and communicated clearly that it's about the players that you have, and that the players that he had in Chicago or that he had in Detroit are not the players he has in Chicago. And we don't even know yet what all the players he's going to have in Chicago are until we get through free agency and the draft. And so, there's a lot that still can change. So he can't tell you today, this is exactly what our offense is going to look like. But he can tell you that he's going to sit down Caleb Williams throughout this process and say, hey, Caleb, what's going to work best for you? How can we structure this offense to maximize your strengths and minimize your weaknesses? He did the same thing with Jared Goff in Detroit, and he's going to do that same process with Caleb to get different offense with Caleb. And the offense he then builds around Caleb Williams' skill set and DJ Moore's skill set and Roman Dunze's skill set, et cetera, will be based on some key philosophies that he was able to outline here at his introductory press conference.
How would you describe what your offense is going to be about? Caleb's different than Jared Goff. What would you describe to Bears fans what to expect from this offense?
Philosophically, what I believe in is similar to a blast from the past named John Shoup, and that is to make same things look different and different things look the same. All right? We want the defense on their heels. We're always going to be attacking on offense. We believe in multiplicity, and so that's both formationally and conceptually. We're going to make things very challenging on the defense each and every week. We want the ability to morph, whether it's 50 runs in a game or 50 passes in a game, it does not matter. Balance to me is throughout the entire season, not necessarily within the game. And with that being said, those are broad strokes of what this will look like. It's not going to look like it did in Detroit. We have a completely different personnel group than what we did in Detroit. So this entire offense is going to be predicated on the guys that we have available, and that's going to take the springtime as well as training camp to hone in to what that's going to look like.
There's a lot to like there in how Ben Johnson describes offensive philosophy about keeping a defense on their heels and attacking them and making things look different and be the same and make different things look the same and sort of be multiple and morph as they need to fit a certain game and certain situation. That's all really great stuff that you want to see in the Bears offense. This is the part, though, where I don't want to say pump the brakes, because we should definitely be excited about Ben Johnson. The point being, this is where I'll come back down to reality a little bit here, take a step back and add some perspective here in that, yes, that's all we wanted to hear Ben Johnson say, and it's good stuff. I will say there's a difference between being able to say that at the press conference and then being able to execute it that way and stick to the words that or the actions that match the words. Because I'm old enough to remember last year when Shane Waldron was hired as Bears offensive coordinator, and he said a lot of the same stuff. And that doesn't mean Ben Johnson and Shane Waldron got the same results, but there was a difference in the actions that followed the words as opposed to the words themselves being similar there. Shane Waldron had talked about, yes, we want to make things look the same for the offense and look different for the defense. And things that look different for the defense he didn't use those exact words, but he talked about having an offense that can disguise in that way. He talked about an offense that can be multiple, right? Like he talked about trying to hone in on what would be best for these players. And as we learned throughout the process, up to when Shane Waldron got fired and afterward, there wasn't proper communication and understanding between quarterback and offensive coordinator. And that's where that's where Ben Johnson has to be different. He's got the right ideas. A lot of offensive coordinators have the right ideas, but the actual execution of those ideas comes down to some of those things we just heard about from Ben Johnson in the first clip earlier, right? Yes, you have the ideas, but can you communicate that, not only communicate that to Caleb Williams properly, but also listen from Caleb Williams properly and absorb that properly? Can you do the same thing with your receivers, your running backs? I think with Shane Waldron, there was some, I don't want to say assumptions per se, but improper communication where he thought certain things about what Caleb Williams wanted or could do, and maybe that wasn't exactly what was best there. And I don't know whether Shane didn't say enough to him or listen enough to him, or if Caleb didn't say enough to Shane to communicate it, whatever it was, there wasn't enough proper communication. Ryan Poles himself has said maybe they weren't exactly on the same page there the way that they needed to be, and they weren't in sync that way. And that's a big part of the problem, despite Waldron saying a lot of those kind of things that we heard Ben Johnson say there. And so that's where I'm like, I'm not trying to pump the brakes. The more I'm just saying, like, let's praise Ben Johnson. Let's be really excited about Ben Johnson. And let's also make sure that we don't just assume that means everything is going to happen exactly the way he said. And let's look out, and we talk about accountability, right? Ben Johnson talks about accountability and integrity and consistency and communication. All right, he's communicating. Now let's get to the meeting those expectations. The expectations are being set high. Will there be consistency through that? Will there be accountability for the times when they're not like that? And I also wonder, when he talks about could be 50 runs or could be 50 passes in a game, I could imagine a scenario where Bears fans could be frustrated sometimes if they go to 50 passes in a game and say, oh, why didn't you run the ball more? And maybe there's a game where they run it 50 times and you say, oh, why didn't you pass the ball more? Like, there's always room for, not everything's going to be perfect. There's going to be mistakes along the way, and Ben Johnson deserves some benefit of the doubt there and deserves room to learn on the job also. It's going to take time. He mentioned there, like, it will take the spring and training camp to really start to hone in on this stuff. It might not be a perfectly oiled machine right away week one, but it certainly feels like it can't get any worse than it was last year, right? And I think in the long run, there's a lot of confidence in what Ben Johnson's going to be able to do with this offense, and more specifically, do with Caleb Williams. And I want to go a little bit more narrowly in on the quarterback play caller relationship, the quarterback head coach relationship here, and how Ben Johnson envisions that process going with Caleb next on Locked On Bears. This episode of Locked On Bears is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. From the first whistle to the final drive, FanDuel makes the NFL playoffs even more exciting, because right now, new customers can get $300 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. So you place a $5 bet on anything in the FanDuel app, whether it's these conference championship games in the playoffs, or the NBA season, the NHL season, soccer, tennis, all the combat sports, you name it. If you hit your first $5 bet on any of those, FanDuel is going to give you an extra $300 in bonus bets to keep the action going. The FanDuel app is easy to navigate, and the variety of bets keeps every game exciting. Plus, when you win, you get paid instantly. No waiting around for your winnings. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today and get started with $300 in bonus bets. That's FanDuel.com. Make this playoff season unforgettable with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. Everything Ben Johnson wants to do with the offense and the system, and also just head coach leadership stuff, everything we've heard him talk about so far, can't happen successfully without proper quarterback play and development. certainly Caleb Williams has already shown us a lot to really like about quarterback play. Like, it's not that he needs to fix a broken Caleb Williams, but there's this idea of continuing to grow the quarterback into the player they and we believe Caleb Williams can be. That's so much of why the Bears hired Ben Johnson, is not only to fix the culture stuff and to have a smart offense around Caleb Williams, but also to work with Caleb directly and put him in the best position to be successful. Because even Ben Johnson acknowledged in his press conference, like, everything tells you in the NFL that it's all about the quarterback. The performance of the quarterback matters more, even, he said, than turnover ratio. The analytics will show you quarterback performance is more conducive to winning than whether you win or lose the turnover ratio. Like, obviously, turnover ratio matters, but quarterback matters more. The numbers bear that out, that having quality, consistent quarterback play is the most important thing, and that's a big part of what brought him to the Chicago Bears, and perhaps the largest single task of anything else on the roster. If you think about, like, culture stuff being a broad series of tasks, the largest, like, individual thing is, like, relationship development of Caleb Williams. And even that has quite a few little things underneath it that can make it more than just a one action thing. But it's clear that that's a priority for Ben Johnson. We mentioned earlier, he talked about sitting down Caleb Williams and being able to kind of go through and say, okay, what does this offense need to look like for you? It needs to be calibrated with Caleb Williams in mind. But I think even beyond just sitting down on the front end and saying, okay, like, for Caleb Williams, we want to throw these type of routes or run these types of plays or this kind of structure. It's a deeper process than that. It's not just like, okay, Caleb gave me my input, I'm going to go into the lab and tinker and then come back and say, here's the offense, Caleb, you do it, go take it and run with it. Like, it's much more of a relationship and a meshing and melding of the minds between quarterback and play caller. And that seems to be Ben Johnson's real focus here when it comes to developing Caleb Williams. Here's how he addressed it.
How would you kind of characterize what, like, your vision would be for helping get a quarterback to where he needs to be?
I think it's time on task. It's trust. I've already talked to Caleb. We're going to have to spend a lot of time together. The play caller and the quarterback have to be integrated. The quarterback needs to be able to see the game through the play caller's eyes. In my opinion, that's the only way it works. And so we're going to spend a lot of time together this springtime. Certainly during training camp, we'll be able to see how much headway we can make. But there's already things I've talked to him about that I've noticed in his game that I want to address and I want to go ahead and take a look at early and often here.
To go along with that, one of the other things Ben Johnson said in a separate quote, so I didn't want to, like, splice the clips together and make it confusing, but he talked about, like, the late game situations, right? When it's the fourth quarter, under 2 minutes, and when do you call a timeout? When do you go no huddle? When do you spike it? That kind of stuff. And one of the other things he talked about there is that, like, he said the quarterback and the head coach need to be on the exact same page so that the quarterback is operating like a coach. The quarterback is thinking like a coach out on the field. And there's no, like, he didn't say this, but it's almost like there's no need for communication because they already know, because they're already on such the same page. Of course, there needs to be communication. He didn't say that, but it's right. It's this idea that, like, their mindsets and mentalities and thought processes are one and the same in that point. And that comes with a lot of time working on it together. That's the thing he said. Time on task is really going to be important there. And it's something you can try and rush as much as you can, but some of it just takes time, and you can't fast pass your way through and speed up and cram 6 months into 2 weeks. Like, it's just going to take time. And so the relationship between Ben Johnson in April is going to be different than the relationship in August versus the relationship in November. Right? It's something that's going to keep growing over time, and even over the course of years, not just months, those guys working through each other, but the more time they're able to spend, the more they can see the game through each other's eyes. And Ben's going to, we heard him earlier, right? Push him, challenge him, get comfortable being uncomfortable, because it's not just going to be everything Caleb does is great and he doesn't have anything to work on. Like, no, we're cleaning up the footwork, we're cleaning up the delivery, we're speeding up the processes, we're working on the pocket presence. Like, every little thing can keep getting better for Caleb, while at the same time trying to make life easier for him by improving the offensive line, by improving the running game, by working more play action, by simplifying the concepts but making it look different for the defense, right? All the things that Ben Johnson does well in an offensive structure. And then on top of that, a team-wide structure by having communication, expectations, accountability for every player on the team. So Caleb will know what his job is on every play, what every receiver's job is, what every blocker's job is, and everyone will know everyone's job. Everyone will know the expectations. Everyone will know what it's supposed to look like, what it's not supposed to look like, so that in theory, that all comes together with a successful football team. I know it's a lot and it feels like it's a long way away, but Ben Johnson doesn't feel like it's a long way away. Like he talked about how, when he was entering this season, he thought the Bears were a sleeping giant. He thought the Bears were going to be a really good team this year. He said he was more scared of the Bears as a Lions offensive coordinator. He was more scared of the Bears coming into this season than he was the Packers or the Vikings, because he thought this team was going to be good and was very close to doing big things. So he even said, like, we're ready to win in 2025. Like, this is not we got to take a couple years to develop Caleb in this offense. It's like, no, they're not going to be in peak form right away week one, but this is a team that's ready to compete, that he sees, he likes a lot of the talent of this team. You just add a little more to the O-line, add a little more to the defense, wherever else you want to throw in some pieces, and they should be ready to compete. That doesn't mean 15 wins. That doesn't mean first round bye, but it does mean pushing for the playoffs and trying to get to the type of expectations that we thought the Bears should have entering this season is where we can really start hitting quickly next season. And it's a really exciting time to see what this Bears team is going to be able to do. And we don't even know yet what the free agents and draft picks are going to look like, but there's a lot of draft capital. There's a lot of free agent cap space for the Bears to sign. It sounds like Kansas City Chiefs guard Trey Smith will hit the open market and will become the highest paid guard in football. Will that be from the Bears? We'll see. We got a lot of free agency and draft to get into throughout the rest of the offseason here on the Locked On Bears podcast. We're not done talking about Ben Johnson and this coaching staff, though, either. I still want to go through what some of the biggest obstacles will be that Ben Johnson faces. And as Ben builds his coaching staff, I want to get to know this new Bears coaching staff, especially, mainly the defensive coordinator, but some of the assistants as well. Once that starts to come together, we'll break down all those coaches for you right here on Locked On Bears. So make sure you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts, because that's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. The football news is moving fast and furious this time of year, so if you want to keep up on all the biggest stories in the NFL, make Locked On NFL your second listen today. The Locked On NFL podcast comes out twice a day. It's always fresh for you with Tony Wiggins in the barbershop in the afternoon, and Tyler Rowland gets you first thing in the morning with a shot of NFL espresso to get you going. So there's always more football talk here on Locked On. Coming back tomorrow for another episode of Locked On Bears and another opportunity for you to bear down.